Hi, this is Chaplain Tyler, and you're watching this video on You Got This with Tyler. Today I'm going to talk about compassion fatigue and how it's often not recognized as the source of various other conditions. So, why do I say that? Well, most of us who experience compassion fatigue find that we experience symptoms that are related to other kinds of illnesses or conditions. So, for example, compassion fatigue often results in depression. Well, we can treat the depression, but if we don't treat the source of the depression, which is the compassion fatigue, it's likely the depression will persist. And it will also probably get worse over time. Same thing applies for anxiety. Anxiety is something that builds tremendously when we experience compassion fatigue. We start to dread things that are coming, and we may start to experience panic attacks. Well, unless we understand that compassion fatigue, which again, as a reminder, is the cumulative effect of experiencing secondary traumatic stress. So if we consistently have that compassion fatigue in our lives, and we develop anxiety and maybe panic attacks or other social anxiety disorders, we can treat those symptoms. But unless we get at the root, which is the compassion fatigue, again, it's likely that those symptoms are going to persist and probably will get worse over time. Another one that is very much in line with compassion fatigue, and I think the one that people mistake it most for, is that adrenal burnout. And burnout is something that does occur with many, many people. And burnout is when you've been going at something for too long without a break, and your emotional and spiritual and physical and mental resources are drained, and you cannot get on top of things. You start to feel a lack of energy, you start maybe becoming more irritable, and so on. Now that's very similar to compassion fatigue, but with compassion fatigue, the source is completely different. It's not that a person has gone too long going at something, although that may be part of the problem. The issue with compassion fatigue is the secondary traumatic stress. And if that is not addressed and integrated and worked through, then it doesn't matter what a person does. The burnout, what they think is burnout, which is really the compassion fatigue, is not going to get better. The only thing that's going to get better, the only way it gets better, is if you address the secondary traumatic stress. Unresolved grieving is also something that people mistake in this. Compassion fatigue can exaggerate the symptoms that we go through in everyday life where we are exposed to loss. And when we are grieving, deeply grieving something, which has, again, a lot of other associated potential symptoms like depression and even maybe some trauma in there, it is really difficult to be able to understand why our grieving is either taking so long to resolve, although in truth grief never truly resolves. It's that we learn to integrate and live with the loss, but even that process is disrupted a lot when we're experiencing any real amount of compassion fatigue. And the last one that's difficult to understand and integrate is, what's the difference between somebody who experiences post-traumatic stress disorder and someone who experiences secondary traumatic stress? Well, in my experience, there really is no difference. The source of primary traumatic stress is if the trauma happens to the person directly. If they experience it directly, that's when they experience primary traumatic stress. When a person is exposed to secondary traumatic stress, They experience and empathize with the person who has experienced the primary traumatic stress, and they are impacted by that. And research shows that there really isn't that much of a difference. So one of the problems in dealing with compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, is that we're really dealing with a type or a form of traumatic stress. And that needs to be handled differently. It's not something that you can just work through the same way as if you were working through, again, a grieving or something like that. That secondary traumatic stress is traumatic stress, and it is very different. So as I've tried to help people over the years, and again, primarily in healthcare and working with different staff members, and as I've experienced secondary traumatic stress myself, I really had to keep, it was very, very difficult to try to understand what the source of the different issues was. And again, because the compassion fatigue exaggerated everything else that I was already experiencing. And it really was a type of masking almost, and made the recovery much, much more complex. So I give that to you today as something to understand that compassion fatigue is something that's under the surface. It's something that isn't easily recognized. We don't get a really good grasp or a handle on it. It's something that we don't recognize because the other symptoms that go along with it are the ones that we recognize first. They're the signs of it, but we normally address the signs and not the root, not the cause. And it's that reason, that's one of the reasons that I came up with my own comprehensive system of recovery called the Compassion Fatigue Recovery System, because it addresses the trauma, the secondary traumatic stress, not just the other symptoms. It gets at the root of what's there and helps take that and integrate that over time. So if you're interested in knowing more about that course, please go to You Got This with Tyler, and you will find different information on that course there. You can also direct message me for information, and I'd be happy to share. In the meantime, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you have a very blessed day. I see you, I believe in you, and you got this. Take care.